You were backing up when you were, looking at possible designs for the dome. What was there anything that inspired you in terms of the look of the dome, or what were you thinking about or looking at in those early? Did you go and look at other stadiums around the country? What did you do to prepare yourself?
We did. We visited every stadium in the country, and the Olympic Stadium in Mexico City was being built. We went there. We went to Munich to see the stadium that was there. But mainly from the standpoint of getting the seating proper, proper view of all of for the spectators for all of the different sports. But the appearance of the building itself is unique. And it, again, like the River Gate, was dictated by trying to simply enclose the very reason for the building of being there, which was the seating, and making it an honest expression of that. The materials we selected were dictated by weight. We wanted the outside is sheathed in aluminum, that kind of gold-colored aluminum, because that's the lightest weight material that we could get. And it's a permanent material. It cleans itself when it rains. So it was that's how the look came about. One of the things that you might be interested in is the fact that in New Orleans, we have a high water table. That's why all of the tombs in the cemeteries have built above ground. In most stadiums, the field is excavated to be below grade. So when you walk into the building at grade, you walk down half a level or halfway.
You saying the grade?
Since the water table is so high in New Orleans, you couldn't excavate the field as in other stadiums. So we created an artificial grade, which is the roof of the garage. In other words, you walk up ramps and you get on the roof of the garage, and that's the plaza, and that's the main entrance into the stadium, and that's at the mid-level. So you walk down from there into the field seats and go up escalators to the rest of the building. That accomplishes another thing. It separates the pedestrians from the vehicles. The vehicles circle around the stadium in one direction before the game, and then the lights change and you go the other way to get out. And those vehicles go under bridges that go across the streets and down the ramps. You see what I'm saying? That's very important because after a game is over, all of the people trying to cross the street holds up the traffic, and the building is designed so that you can be in your automobile on the way home in 20 minutes after the game's over.
It's amazing. It's always been a marvel to me. Yeah, the design of it. Hurricane disaster management. Is the dome part of the hurricane plan, disaster plan? Or?
I don't know if it is or not, but I've written to people about that because it would be a tremendously safe refuge for people to be if a hurricane was coming. That they have a model of the worst hurricane that could hit New Orleans. It would put 20 feet of water over the city, I think, if it came a certain direction at a certain time. But the dome would certainly serve as a very safe place for a tremendous number of people.
Is the dome still, is it the largest building ever constructed, or is anything else surpassed it at this point? In terms of domed stadium, I know that there are...
No, it's still the biggest domed stadium ever built. And I think it's the largest structure ever built. I checked it out one time. There were two other buildings that were huge. One is the factory out in Seattle where they build the 747 aircraft. And the other is the housing for the space vehicle at Cape Canaveral. And I figured up the volume of those two buildings, and it's less than the volume of the Superdome. And I think it's the Superdome is 176 I don't know, million square feet. I'm not sure how big.
My
It's
gosh.
huge, tremendous.
Right. The Plaza Tower, the technological innovation in terms of the Plaza Tower and the foundation of the Plaza Tower.
Yeah.
Did that assist, that technology, was that of any assistance when you were building the dome? Anything?
It was.
How so?
I'm not so sure about the Plaza Tower, perhaps the Plaza Tower, but the, is it the Texaco, no, what is the Shell, the Shell building?
Ringing the doorbell.
I'm thinking of the Shell building. The Shell building was the first really tall building in New Orleans, like in Houston or other cities. The Plaza Tower might have been before then. I'm not sure if it utilizes this same type foundation, but there was developed the pre-stressed, precast concrete pile. I think they're made 150 feet long. Without the invention of that pile, you couldn't have built the Shell building, and you certainly could never have built the Superdome, and maybe not the Plaza. I'm not sure about that. But the Superdome is supported on the original crust of the earth, and the piling are driven down or jetted down through the ground to that elevation, and that holds up the whole.
So how far down is that? How far?
I think it's 150 feet.
Mm-hmm.
It could. I'll get that figure for you.
Yeah,
But there are two lengths of piling, one driven and then another attached to the top of that one, and then driven down. And I think in my book it tells how many there are, but it's just a forest of piling under the building holding it up.
When you were first building the dome, were there any surprises in terms of unexpected things?
No, I don't think so.
No, you kind of everything was sort of planned.
We planned the whole thing very carefully, and
the view of the dome during the day, and were you able to try to take that into consideration as to what it would look like by day and what it would look like by night? Is that a consideration of what you used in terms of that aluminum and that skin on it? What were some of your thoughts by day and by night?
Well, the nighttime view of the dome.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Let me finish this. Okay, that's okay. No problem. Okay, all right.
The lighting of the dome has been added, and I have communicated with the Superdome people, the Louisiana Exposition District, and asked them to let me design a lighting system for the dome that I thought would be appropriate. It's a very difficult building to light, and it is lit, but I think it could be lit a lot better than it is. I think it does look acceptable at night. But I've noticed, what made me notice that was when they would have an important event in the dome, they would have the blimp flying over, and it should be lit, not a dark place in the cityscape.
Right.
You know, from the air I'm talking about.
Right.
But the rest of the building is well lit. The plaza and the parking areas, approaches to the building, the streets around.
Let's move on a little bit, unless there's anything else you want to add concerning the dome. I want to talk a little bit about Poitras Street. Anything else in the dome, though, that we haven't touched on?
I think we've pretty well covered everything.
Paul, you're in there a lot.
What have you noticed in there that...
Not recently, but I remember when the pigeons used to eat the roof.
Oh, yeah, did you?
Oh, gosh.
Tell me, yeah, what about the pigeons?
I'd forgotten about that. I don't know how they solved that. But, over in Little Rock, the pigeons ate up a whole roof of a building over there. I'm not sure that was ever a big problem. The big problem was people shooting at it.
Shooting at what?
The roof.
From the interstate, or?
From the interstate and from the housing project. That's still a problem.
I've never heard that before. Interesting. Huh.
They shoot holes in the roof.
Poitras Street, when you're looking at the dome from Poitras away, you know, with your back to the river, okay, It's always reminded me of almost a woman's waist, the way it kind of comes in like that. What are some of your impressions of when you're looking at the dome from Poydras? Not just passing by, but like drive. Was there a goal in mind when from that view of driving down Poydras?
We wanted we wanted the building to be a landmark. True. If you'll ever notice Lafayette Street, that was part of the plan for the Superdome. We created a walking street from the dome all the way to the river. And the idea was for people to come in from the parking areas that I described earlier and then walk along there and get into the dome. And from Lafayette Street, you could look up and see the dome from the river. But the strange thing about it was we then designed the Hyatt Hotel. And we destroyed the view, but we made the walk, the Lafayette Street pedestrian way goes, I don't know if you've ever been in that way, but you can go from Loyola up into the shopping. They have restaurants and bars and things. That's below the lobby of the Hyatt. And then you walk through the new shopping mall and into the dome, all the way undercover from Loyola all the way in. And from that point to the river is the Lafayette Mall. But the only other real view is the one that I've got a picture of it in my book, how you can see this huge shape kind of coming out into Poydras so that you can see it as you're driving up that way. It's kind of a interesting view of the building.
What color considerations did you have in terms of is it getting louder? It's like, woo! Okay.
Why, this is the loudest noise office I've ever been in.
What, at some point I guess you thought, well, gee, what color is this going to be? I mean, I know some of it was dictated by the use of materials, but what was going through your mind in terms of the choice of color?
We had only really one choice, I think, and that was the choice of the aluminum. It's anodized. The color is built into the material. And we could have selected maybe several different colors, and we chose that goldish color. The roof was always to be white. We realized that and liked that idea. Then the other colors are in the plaza is brick. That's a brick color, of course, and then the rest of it is exposed aggregate concrete. I think we put some color in the aggregate to get that kind of brownish color that's there. We picked that out to go with the aluminum.
How do you think it fits into the skyline?
I think it fits very well. It's fun to, when you're flying into New Orleans, it just looks like some giant space saucer that's landed there and belongs there. It seems to belong like where it is to me. People get used to things like that. I hope we get used to the new casino. Maybe we won't ever.
You could only make one comment about the dome and the river gate. What would that be? I mean, the dome first, just in terms of what it means to you, what it means to the city.
I think it's probably the most important thing that ever happened to New Orleans after the French Quarter, to preserve the viability of downtown, to spur the construction that took place along there, to spur the construction of hotels, and the benefit to the community that's come from the ripple effect of the events that they have in it. There's been a study by the University of New Orleans, the number of billions of dollars in new money that's come into New Orleans because of that. So from that point of view, I think it's, and the fact that we have the Saints football team, which is most people in the community, it's a thing that you can get behind. It's a one thing really in New Orleans that everybody can be a part of, as opposed maybe in some ways Mardi Gras is, but it's not either. But the dome and the things that take place in there is something that the whole city can unite and be a part of. And then every architect wants to have something that's that important to leave as an example of his work, and that, you know, it's very gratifying to know that I had a part in something that important. And not only in New Orleans, but people from all over the world know about the Superdome. And maybe not so much because it's a piece of architecture or engineering that's unique, but because of the television coverage that gets from the events that take place. You know, I go to North Carolina, and the University of North Carolina is playing in the Final Four. Everybody in the state is watching the thing. They know about the Superdome, and then I go in and I tell them that I designed it, and they're very impressed. Which I like, which I want them to be, you know, if I'm being interviewed for a job.
Right, absolutely. Doesn't hurt to have that on the resume. The Rivergate, just kind of summing up.
Yeah.
The Rivergate. In other words, one final statement about the Rivergate.
Well, that's a thing of the past, but what really, I always admired the Rivergate. In fact, I think the Rivergate was the best building that our firm ever did, from an architectural point of view and everything, design. It was better than anything, better than the Superdome as a piece of architecture.
In what way?
Because it was a unique, pure example of what I described, of the structural system and the use of the building and the shapes and everything. And it ranked, I think, with some of the best buildings that have been built in the world. And people have said that about it. I mentioned the Dulles Airport. Everybody recognizes that as not the best, but certainly one of the best 5 buildings ever built in this country since the war. And I think the Rivergate holds its own very nicely with that building, or did. But it's gone now. But what made me, what softened the loss of it was the tremendous support that came from the community to try to get them to preserve it.
When you heard that it was going to be torn down, what was your first feeling?
I was amazed. I couldn't believe that they would do such a thing. The mentality that to destroy an important asset of the city that the citizens had paid for or were paying for, it was unbelievable to me that they would do that.
What about those who might say it's just, you don't appreciate something until you know more about it? Could it have been a lack of knowledge as to what that building, like you've explained to me in these past few hours, what that building represented and meant? Was it just a lack of awareness?
I don't think that would have made a bit of difference, because the people that made that decision they don't care about that.
Right.
You do, and you do, but they don't.
Right.
And it's the funniest thing. I say funny, it's tragic, really. And this is my own opinion. That casino may never open. And they're losing $5 million a month at the auditorium. How can they make money with a much bigger debt service and everything that has to be met? And you can't get enough money out of the community to pay for it.
That's right. Really?
Oh, well, that's something else.
Yeah.
The sequel.
The sequel, right.
Yeah.
Poydras Street, okay. Among the early plans for Poydras was that part of it would be residential. And that never has, I think at the Plaza Tower, which is not quite on Poydras, but there were actually penthouses built, on the top of the Plaza Tower. But that didn't quite get realized. If we could go back 30 years, okay, or 30 plus years, in terms of what Poydras Street was supposed to do and what it has done. I know it has been very successful, but also maybe what is it still yet to do? What are some things you'd still like to see happen on Poydras?
Well, I'm not sure New Orleans doesn't have a lot of dwellings downtown of apartment houses and condominiums. They're beginning to have some in the warehouse district, which and people want to live as near to where they work as they can. That's really what built the Vieux Carré. You know, it was a place where people worked, had the shops down below and then lived up above. And that's being used that way today, and that's what really has preserved it. It's been used. But there's a big need in a lot of cities have places where people can live and then walk to work from where they live, and they can do that from the warehouse district. So I don't know what to expect for Poydras Street, whether it's been office buildings that have sprung up along there. The big need in New Orleans, it seems now, is for more hotels. Works so well.
Any more thoughts about Poydras and the vision for Poydras and what the dome does for it and just the overall street, your impressions of the street today, and what it initially was planned to be?
Well, it was planned for expansion. I've never heard about the apartments before. I think it could use apartments. Certainly, it'd be a great thing to have apartments on it. But hotels and office buildings, it doesn't seem to be a people street as much as it should. Well, Canal Street would be, or is, if it weren't so dangerous crime-wise. But the Shell building, for instance, is not a. You walk by it, you can't see anything. The ideal street is 3rd Avenue in New York, where you can walk and you look into the shops and you look into the little restaurants. You do that in the French Quarter's that way too. And Canal to some extent is that way, but Poydras isn't. So maybe it needs more pedestrian-oriented type buildings, spaces. And maybe not its full length, but near the dome would be nice to have places like that near the dome where people on their way to home from the games or back to the hotels could have little shopping places.
On to the French Quarter. The French Quarter in the 60s. What are your recollections of what kind of place it was in the 60s?
I think it's pretty much exactly the way it is now, except there weren't near as many places that sold T-shirts and things like that. And I guess the stripteases were more wicked, because now it's kind of ludicrous or tame compared to the real sexy things that go on, in magazines. Or
you were very much involved with the construction of hotels, new construction in the French Quarter in the late 50s, early 60s. What challenges did that present to you in the construction? I mean, to try to fit into an old world environment.
Well, we were selected to design the Royal Orleans Hotel. That's the first hotel to be built in the French Quarter, and one of the first to be built in New Orleans for years. The Fairmont was the newest hotel, I think, at that point. But it was a big piece of vacant land there where the St. Louis Hotel used to be and was demolished in 1916. And the Vieux Carré Commission was in force at that time. So we had to decide whether or not to give up our philosophy of only designing modern, contemporary things. And we said, if we build something like the Royal Orleans, it's going to ruin our reputation. And we thought very strongly about maybe not doing it. But then we said, well, if we don't, somebody else is going to surely do it. It won't do. So we tackled the job, and to the everlasting memory of Sam Wilson, You know, Sam, we got him to help us design it. The exterior that would gain approval from the Fair Trade Commission. I said Jack. He had a brother named Jack that was a nice person also. But Sam is a genius in my estimation. And he also helped us with the Sinesta, which we built on Bourbon Street.
Now, what about, though, you know, here you are in the confines of a very limited historic space, driving in pilings. I mean, that was, of course, the Sinesta was the site of a former brewery, wasn't it? The Regal Brewery. Did you all, it wasn't the consideration of, like, I mean, it had to be really kind of rough, I would think.
Well, I'll tell you about the Sinesta. Part of it is below grade. The parking is below grade. And some of the Royal Orleans is below grade, and we had to do that to get everything into the building that was required. Well, we had the excavation done, and the owner went bankrupt.
The owner of what?
Of the hotel. The developer went bankrupt. I can't remember who it was. But then the building stayed dormant there for several years. And we had the big excavation, and it filled up with water. It became a lake. And the ground started oozing into the thing, and the buildings in the neighborhood started cracking. And lawsuits developed, and it was just a terrible headache. Till finally Lester Kabikoff put together a group, and we finished the hotel. And the insurance companies came and settled all of the suits, but one of the things was loss of antiquity. You know, you could fix cracks and repair things, but you can't replace the fact that it was old and now it's been kind of new. Yeah. So they had placed a value on that too. So that was the experience of that hotel. But we didn't have that. The main problem we had with the Royal Orleans was the height limitation. You needed to have so many rooms to support the cost of the land and how much we could get per room and all that. So the top floor of the Royal Orleans is under the roof. And it has dormer windows that give light to the rooms. Have you ever been on the roof of the garage?
Yes, the pool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that
beautiful.
a delightful place?
Space.
To look down on the French Quarter? I've always liked that.
It's one of the nicest spaces.
The Sinesta has a nice area up where the pool is.
Oh, really? It's been a while since I've been up there, but the Royal Orleans is one of my favorites.
Oh, yeah. I love that
places.
hotel.
Yeah.
Look, as you walk in the building, you know where I think Boyd Cruz made that painting of the St. Louis Hotel. Uh-huh. You're facing it. To your left, if you look all the way down to the wall, there's a map of the French Quarter. My father drew that.
Oh, really? Yeah, and the little the Esplanade Lounge right there.
Yeah. It's painted on the back of glass.
Uh-huh.
He didn't paint it, but I'll show you his map that they copied it from. Okay. Another thing that I love about that hotel is you stand in the lobby, and you know how you walk down those steps? That's a lower level, and this huge chandelier hangs right there. You're looking straight at it from that. So I think that's really lovely to see that.
It's a great space. And your dad tried to save, what, the St. Louis Hotel?
Yes, he was interested. Yeah, he tried to reuse that building. Mm-hmm. It's in his book.
Yeah. Betsy, let's talk hurricanes for a minute here. What are some of your personal recollections of Betsy?
Our daughter was going to be married that day. And we had just moved into my new house on Marquette Place. And the house is all glass. It's behind a 8-foot wall that goes around the property, but inside of it is all glass. And we had to postpone the wedding. The wedding was going to be at our house, and the reception too. And here comes a wedding cake, and here comes a hurricane. And we sat up all night with that cake and with that hurricane, and here I said to myself, I'm an architect, and my house is going to blow down. My new house is going to blow down. And I was so worried about that. But we didn't have a bit of damage. and the roof, the chimneys were blowing down on all over the place. I would say 90% of the roofs in New Orleans were damaged as a result of Betsy.
How about Camille? Even though New Orleans wasn't directly affected, do you have any recollections of Camille?
Yes. The strongest recollection I have, we designed a building in Gulfport. It's a Mississippi Power Company. I don't know if you've ever noticed it. And the word was that it had been blown down. So we tried to go over there and see it, and we couldn't get there. But actually, it withstood. Everything was leveled, and it was up on a higher piece of ground, and I don't think anything at all happened to it. But a big ship was blown. I've got a photograph of that ship laying right there at the base of the building. But I remember that about Camille. And we were on vacation in San Francisco, and we couldn't get home that night. And luckily, the thing didn't come right to New Orleans. But
what about snow? The snow of '63. Do you remember that?
I sure do. The snow in my house is just unbelievable. It's so beautiful. Look, you see, as I mentioned, it had glass everywhere. Every room has a patio in my house with sliding doors, and it looks out on these little patios that are lushly planted. Some have little fountains and pools. And I'd like you to come look at it sometime. But to look out there and see snow was a big thrill to me, and I took some pictures of it. But this building looked great with snow all over the front of it.
Let's talk about the suburbs now, and sort of outside of, even though Oakwood is still, I guess, technically in Algiers and very close to Gretna. You all were part of the design team for Oakwood, weren't you?
Shopping center.
The shopping center, yeah. Tell me a little bit about, it was more the mall, it was the sense of what the malls were becoming more and more popular at the time.
Edgar Stern, do you remember Edgar Stern? Great, great person. And sadly, he moved to Colorado. I think he got maybe kind of fed up with New Orleans. But I used to say that Edgar Stern was to us like Pope Julius was to Michelangelo. He kept giving us jobs. And he was a good friend of Arthur Davis's, and I got to be good friends with him. And he and his father built the Royal Orleans Hotel. He built the Oakwood Shopping Center. We did a ski resort for him in Utah, Park City, Utah. We designed a land development out in California for him. And we designed a hotel in San Francisco, the Stamford Court Hotel, for him. How did we get started on this?
Oakwood.
Okay, and Oakwood Shopping Center. That's what made me think of it. And we built Oakwood Shopping Center, which I think might have been the first real shopping center in the area. Skylight leaked.
Oh, really?
We finally got it. Had a big sky.
Was that Edgar B. Stern? Wait, was that Mrs. Edith Stern's
son?
The son.
Yeah.
The son. Okay, it's Junior. Okay. Oh, okay. Anything else that we haven't discussed in terms of trying to think a little bit more about the '60s? And when I used the term Houstonization, you kind of knew what that meant. What does that mean to you in terms of the feeling about New Orleans and how New Orleans felt about itself in the '60s? Could you kind of share with me, let's say if somebody who wasn't here in the '60s, what was the sense of city leaders and the chamber? Can you describe that for me a little bit in terms of Poitras and the Dome and the River Gate?
Have you ever read a book called End of an Era? It's about New Orleans before the Civil War. New Orleans was the center of commerce of the United States. It was a center of culture. We had opera. We had theater. We had the best school system, and we had enough money to hire the school teachers from New England, And that all ended with the Civil War. But when the 60s came, when we started first practicing architecture, New Orleans was the biggest city in the South. It was bigger than Atlanta, bigger than Miami, bigger than Houston. And I don't know what happened. Why they passed us up. I know Miami, for instance, when it came time for jet planes to come to the airport, we didn't have a runway that was long enough to handle the planes. So they went to Miami, and you should see the Miami airport today, or Miami itself, the city. We are closer to South America and Mexico than they are, but all of the traffic goes through Miami, and all of the shoppers come up to Miami instead of New Orleans. They go there for their medical treatment instead of to the auction, like they should be. But Houston and Atlanta both, to me, are remarkable cities. I just, in a way, New Orleans is a better place to live than those two cities. But I don't think it's a better place to earn a living. And that affects me, my practice. I do just maybe 5% of what I do here. I just live here and eat here and sleep, enjoy being here, but work elsewhere. And it's only made possible by jet plane travel. But maybe we were too preoccupied with Mardi Gras. Could be one reason why we didn't grow like other cities. Maybe it was the location. We're kind of at the end of the line. Atlanta is a hub. It's just amazing what they're doing in Atlanta. I go there quite often. I'm involved with a building there. And I go to Houston all the time. And they have so much money, the streets all don't have holes in them, and they have enough money to have the most beautiful Christmas decorations and lights that you've ever seen.
But back to the 60s in terms of, so what was the feeling here? Was there a feeling of trying to catch up? Or, in other words, what was progress?
Well, we were, as I was saying, we were ahead then. And I can't really recall what the attitude of the people were, but we sure had people like Edgar Stern that was building things and was looking to the future to accomplish things. But along came this developer that built the Plaza Towers that we were talking about. He didn't last very long. Joe Cannizzaro has done a fabulous job of building things here, but he's one of maybe 10 or 15 people like him in Atlanta or Houston. I think some of that is bad luck. With the oil crisis, that kind of put a big crimp in our progress. And then maybe it's a desire to keep New Orleans like it always was, which I think is right. I hate to see.
So if you're reflecting, though, on the decade, on the 60s, when I say, the 60s, what immediately comes to mind for you living in New Orleans?
Yeah. It's hard for you to get me to answer that, isn't it?
Yeah. But I'll try.
I'm not sure I know.
No, just personally, not even speaking, as a visionary, to architect. Just
Well, I tell you, in the
60s,
60s, I can tell you, from our point of view, I'm talking about our firm, we were considered to be of national importance, and we were kind of leaders. I'm not so sure people in New Orleans appreciated that or knew it even. But our work was published in all of the national magazines, and we were called on to lecture at schools all over the country. So our attitude was get up and go and just do whatever we could, and progress and everything like that. And I suppose that attitude prevailed more or less. The Chamber of Commerce and the port. I mean, we had, everybody's proud of the port. We had and do still. Isn't it the second largest port in the country? And our natural resources, if you like to fish and hunt and sail and those things, we've got a place here that's unequaled from that point of view.
Maybe
the food.
Well, maybe a little bit more personal, though, like in terms of the six.
I think I'm trying to recall the spirit. I think it was a spirit of get up and go, progress. Is exemplified by the fact that we built this beautiful new library that was looked upon from every point of view as one of the best in the country. We were conscious of our medical facilities, and there was a thrust toward making New Orleans a medical center, a real medical center, where the Charity Hospital is, and the LSU Medical School and Tulane Medical School. Tulane wanted to be the Harvard of the South. You know that it had real aspirations for being the best school that it could be. And we had Oxnard Foundation, where at that time people came from Houston to New Orleans to be treated for cancer, for instance. Now they go from here to the. But there were people then that wanted to do that. I think of Darwin Fenner, who was a big spearhead of trying to get the medical idea going. And of course, the port has always had its advocates, and people realize the value of the port. We didn't have crime like we have now. We didn't have drugs, which I think is, those two things, the biggest problems we have now in the city.
When you and your family would go out on to eat, where did you, in the 60s, where would you have gone? What were some of the popular places that, for a night out?
Antoine's was the place to go. And Brennan's next. Brennan's was kind of a newcomer.
Galatoire's,
of course, We didn't go there because you had to wait out in the street, but everybody loves Galatoire's, and I think says it's the best, one of the best, not the best.
But in more informal, like the family kind of going out.
We spent a great deal of time at the yacht club. It was a place where I spent a lot of time, and the children grew up out there.
Mm-hmm.
We lived in Lake Vista at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And
did you ever go to the top of the Mart, like
yeah.
You and your wife?
Sure.
Describe what,
Are you talking about here?
Yeah, in other words, kind of went around the Mart ITM building. Okay.
Oh yeah.
From an architectural viewpoint, what was the novelty of that, or was that a novelty?
It was the only place that you could go in New Orleans and see the river. Isn't that amazing? Later, they had the Moonwalk and the Spanish Plaza and places like that. But there was no place, even from Audubon Park, you couldn't see the Mississippi River. So that was the first place where you could go to see the river, and that was a big plus for everybody, I thought. And
do you think that's one of the reasons why the Riverfront Expressway almost happened, because people didn't appreciate the river at that point because they couldn't get to it? Or was that part of it, you think?
No, I think it was just the idea of trying to. I don't know exactly. It was the same mentality that tore down the River Gate. They didn't realize that the very reason for New Orleans was the river. And the city, the original city, was built on the river. Jackson Square, Place d'Armes, fronted on the river. And to cut off the city from the river by an elevated expressway is asinine. But some people thought it was a terrible battle because I think it divided the community. A lot of the community leaders were very much for that. I don't remember who they were exactly.
Well, no, but of course, and the Picayune was in favor of it.
Was it?
Yeah, and was that the sort of mentality of what did they think it would do? Just increase activity, economic activity, or what do you think their reason was for being for it? Why do you think they supported it?
They looked at it as progress, and I don't see how it could have benefited New Orleans all that much, really, because it would have helped traffic maybe. They've done other things to solve it besides that, haven't you? Mm-hmm. It's difficult, New Orleans being an old city, and in the neighborhoods of grown up next to the industrial areas in the downtown, that almost any new kind of a thing tends to want to upset that relationship. For instance, the truck traffic getting to the wharves has to go through the neighborhoods. On Louisiana Avenue is one, and River Road, I guess, is another. But when New Orleans was first inhabited, we didn't have automobiles. We had people walked or they went on streetcars. And it wasn't a city like Houston that grew after the automobile. It's one of the main reasons we have a downtown that's still healthy. Well, Houston has too, but a lot of cities like Newark, New Jersey, for instance, all of us have moved to the suburbs so people can get to the shopping by automobile. But I forgot what we were talking about.
I'm sorry, just in terms of the viability of downtown, the riverfront expressway with progress in that.
Yeah. That was the introduction of a foreign thing into an old city that it wasn't planned for. And it would have destroyed it, disturbed the very reason for it. And I'm not sure, you asked me why did they want to have it, and I'm not sure I can answer that. Because
how would you define the word progress in the 60s mindset? What was progress for New Orleans? What did that mean? In the 60s, I mean, what progress is today? I know that's kind of rough, but I mean, can you try?
I guess what they wanted to do was improve the economy and improve housing. That's progress. Have less needy people on welfare, and just make more money. People would make more money.
The 60s saw the rise of interest in even though it existed before with the quarter, preservation. How does historic preservation and saving houses, how does that meet progress? Is that...
That can live together very nicely, and there's no reason why there should be a conflict between preservation and progress. But in the 60s, especially the early part of the 60s, there wasn't a lot of importance placed on preservation, strangely enough. That came later. Thank goodness it did, because we were beginning to lose a lot of the things that made New Orleans such an interesting place. We did have the Via Commission.
Can you recall an example, maybe in the 60s, of some indication of the preservation movement gaining steam? Do you remember anything in particular?
No, the only thing I can think of it losing.
Yeah.
I think about Claiborne Avenue and the oak trees that were demolished, torn down. I think of, well, this didn't happen in the 60s, but the loss of the St. Louis Hotel, I think, was a shame to demolish that. It wouldn't have been done today. I think of the loss of the old Southern Yacht Club. And one of the most terrible things that ever happened in New Orleans was closing the New Basin Canal. Well, here we were, a city that had a canal system like Amsterdam or Leningrad, and we go fill it up. And here we could have boats go from Lake Pontchartrain right down to the center of New Orleans. And all of that frontage for boats to tie up and the commerce and traffic that went through there. That was a terrible mistake to do.
And of course the reason was for railroads, which
Yeah, grade
eventually,
separation.
which eventually became sort of part of it obsolete, didn't it?
Exactly. But I don't think any other ways were searched for to solve the, people had to wait in their automobiles for if they opened a bridge for a schooner to go by. That just upset them a great deal, but so what? I mean, it could have been solved some other way.
Do you have any personal recollections of Chet Morrison?
Yeah, I do.
Can you share some of those with me?
I admired him very much. And he was mayor when we were just getting started. And he kind of typified what we wanted to be too, looking forward. He wanted New Orleans to be the gateway to the Americas. He would have disapproved of changing the image of New Orleans into a casino type city like tends to be with that new building they're building down there. But the gateway to the Americas, that was his big, I really admired that in him. And he was a reformist, and he was honest, and all of those things. And, I think it was his fault that they closed up the canal, I must say. But maybe he was ill-guided. Somebody should have stepped forward and advised him not to do that. Somebody that had the authority, the strength.
How about Vic Skiro? Any recollections of Vic?
Not really.
I asked you to try to define progress. What about modern? What did modern mean in the 60s?
Modern?
Modern. The word modern.
Well, we didn't like to use that word. We used contemporary. I don't know what the difference was, really. But, New Orleans being an old city and all of the architecture, which I admire and appreciate very, very much. But we wanted to build our reputation on being modernists, contemporary. We would refuse to do anything except that way, except for the Royal Orleans Hotel and the Sinestro. The two things that we almost didn't do because of that. But that's what it meant to us. It was the new way of building things, designing and building things that came from Germany or wherever. Like I explained the way that happened.
Did you encounter much opposition in New Orleans?
Yeah.
In what way?
Mainly, we did a lot of houses. Young architects start off their practice, their careers by doing houses. Then they graduate into other things. There was no doubt that the schools were going to be modern buildings. But the houses that we did, and there are a few of them left in New Orleans that we did that I think people kind of ridiculed them when we built them.
I'm sorry.
I can't pinpoint exactly which houses those are, but one of them is on in Audubon Place that still I think people appreciate it now, but at the time they thought it was terrible, ruining the neighborhood.
Really? Oh. Finally, backing up to Poitras, what role did your firm play in the planning of Poitras Street in the vicinity of the Domino Square? You mentioned to me something about what was this plan? What were you charged to do about Poitras?
This book here, the Superdome plan, it was a master plan for the Superdome that the end product was the selection of the site for the building. And we did that in such a way that it related to the whole downtown part of New Orleans, and once we decided to put the building there. And it went all the way from the Superdome to the River Gate, or to the river. I mentioned about Lafayette Street being a walking street that went from the Dome all the way to the river. And it ended up connecting with what the World's Fair was. But we had designed a rapid transit system that looped down Poydras, past the river gate, back out toward the lake on Canal Street and into the river. And that passed nearby all of the hotels that existed. It passed by the big parking reservoir for 5,000 cars at the Superdome and the other car parking down at the river gate. And people would be traveling that because of the river gate and the dome. And that's still a viable thing. If they could, it was to be a monorail system.
Really?
You know, they have one like that in Seattle.
Uh-huh.
That's how I think we got the idea for it.
Anything else that we haven't touched on that you wanted to? I think you're totally probably exhausted. You look like you're in better shape than I am. In terms of the 60s and something that's reminiscent of the 60s.
I'm sorry I can't tell you more, but how things was it
great.
during the 60s.
You were just busy. You're probably working.
Yeah. But
what happened the day you found out you're going to do the dome? What ran through your mind? How did that happen? How did that happen? And you were going to do the
well,
dome?
you know, that's a public building being built by the state. And in order to be selected for a state project, you have to have contributed heavily to the political people that made the decisions. And we never have done that. And that still prevails in the state of Louisiana. Very, very strongly. But anyway, we didn't do that. And Dave Dixon realized that if he was going to get architects selected on some other basis beside who gave the most to who, that he had to take it out of politics. And the way he did that was to appoint a committee of deans, of the deans of the School of Architecture at Tulane and LSU and the other schools in the state, and they formed a blue ribbon committee, and they had a selection process that was held out in the open. I think it was at City Hall, the chambers. They had you were invited to come there and give a presentation of your qualifications, and the whole thing was open and above board, and we were selected.
Did you get a phone call? How did you find out?
I can't remember, really.
Wondering.
Yeah. Well, I remember going to dinner that night at the Blue Room of the Roosevelt with Dave Dixon and Governor McKiffen. He was here probably at the meeting when they selected, and he invited us to have dinner with him. That's what I remember about it. He was a great person.
Yeah. Just finally, what's your favorite, just in terms of maybe the most elegant dining? We talked about, like for instance, the Sazerac Lounge, and I mean, there's some sort of historic places in New Orleans. Do you have any favorite spots in the city?
I like to go to places uptown. I appreciate the places downtown, the restaurants. There's so many good ones down there. But in order to not have to worry about parking and crime and all that, I like to go to neighborhood restaurants. And there's so many good ones that I like to go to up around the river bend. You want me to name some? I don't know.
No, that's okay. I was just
can't.
generally trying to,
Yeah, I like to go to those because, by and large, the food's just as good.
Right.
Clancy's a good example of that.
Yeah.
But that's not all that cheap, really. But
right, but it's a nice place.
Sure.
One final question, and on something else, another
let
project.
Let me tell you one more thing about restaurants.
Yes, please.
My good friend that lives in Houston, he's an architect. He flies here to New Orleans, and I pick him up at the airport, and we go to Compagno's to get an oyster po' boy. We have that in some Dixie beers. I take him back to the airport, and he goes back to Houston.
That's great. Can't get that in Houston, huh?
No.